All right, well, go ahead and call this meeting to order. This is a special meeting, mainly to go over our budget. And so to start with, we'll look for a motion to adopt the agenda as it is.
Made a motion.
Okay,
Second.
All in favor? All right, and Commissioner Charlie's not going to be here for a little while. He's running late. So it'll probably be about another 20 minutes, so he'll probably be here. But he is coming, from my understanding. And no comments. Anybody email or anything? Okay, no public comment. And I'm just going to turn it over to Frank now.
Did y'all have any comments you want to make, or just a
Yeah.
Okay. All right, I obviously gave you a detailed presentation at your meeting last Monday, so I'm not going to go through all of those things again. I really just kind of wanted to start off by pointing out to you that I realize this is my first time going through this process with the six of you, and your first time going through this process with me. The way that I've structured things is a way that I've used many, many years, and I've found that works well, in my opinion. But if you all would like to do something different, I'm all ears to whatever suggestions that you have. I thought what we would do tonight is just briefly go through each one of the departmental budgets and the cost centers that are in there. I'll give you just a couple of high points about each one. Pause, let you ask any questions or share any concerns that you have, any ideas. And then certainly at the end of the meeting, if you want to make some adjustments or changes, we can summarize them then, or if you know along the way, it's totally up to you. I'm a pretty informal guy, so whatever works best for you. I hope, again, as I said last Monday, that this reflects your priorities and the conversations we've had over the past year or so. But if I missed it on something, by all means, make whatever adjustments you think are helpful to address your priorities and your goals and meet the community's needs. I will start with the revenues. The revenues are behind tab number 3. And there is a graph in there, and then starting on page 29, there's a list, an individual line item list of all the revenues. I went through a lot of these at your meeting last Monday. I think the take-home message with the revenues is it's pretty much status quo on the revenues from the current year and previous years. I think the revenue projections are still relatively conservative, probably a little bit more aggressive on the sales tax in particular than you all utilized last year, but I think still very reasonable. There are no changes to any of the fees. There are no new fees. As we discussed, the tax rate would go from 21.25 cents, decrease down to 21 cents. And so you can see the individual line items. I won't belabor the point on all of those. As I mentioned, the sales tax, in my opinion, is the most important revenue source for the town. We're projecting about $506,504 next year. I think that's a reasonable assumption going forward based on our experience over the last couple of years and so far this fiscal year. So with that, I'll stop. And if you have any questions or concerns, I'm happy to try to answer them.
Yeah, Frank, how did you arrive at a $96,000 gain in sales tax revenue?
Yeah, great question.
23.65%.
Yeah. So if you look at the two columns on the right-hand side, you'll see that I'm comparing the recommended budget for next year with the adopted budget for this year. And to me, that's the most meaningful comparison because you all set your tax rate and your fees and your expenditures last year based on the adopted budget. So there's certainly been amendments during the course of the year, and there always are in every community. So I'm comparing the recommended projection for next fiscal year, 23-24, against what you adopted in 22-23. And so there's a couple things going on. One is that your revenue estimate for 22-23 is overly conservative. And that may have been intentional. I don't know what you all discussed or what Zach intended when he put it forth, but you all estimated $409,637. And you can see that the actual amount that we brought in for all of the previous year was $461,944. So for whatever reason, that was a really, really conservative estimate. So that's really the bulk of that $96,887 increase that you're seeing. And then beyond that, we've had pretty good growth throughout the course of this year. The estimate for next year assumes only 2% growth, which I think is on the conservative side. Hopefully it doesn't get worse. Over the last 4 years, we've averaged about 8% growth per year. So that's also contributing to that number that you're seeing.
In actuality, though, you're only looking at 45,000.
That's right. But again, it goes back to, I'm comparing it to the adopted budget, but you're right in terms of what we project for, or what we got last year or 2 years ago, 461,944. We think we'll come in this year at about 497 by the time the year's all said and done.
Where did you get the information to lead you to that figure, though? I mean, the worst thing that can happen if you overestimate the revenue, and then throughout the year you have to do budget.
Yeah. So, yeah, absolutely. And that's going to be incumbent upon Sandy, me, and really all of us to watch the sales tax collections and make sure we're coming in on target. Because you're right, if we're wrong, we're going to have to make some adjustments and maybe reduce expenditures. But I basically that 461,944, that's a given. That was fiscal 21-22. For fiscal 22-23, through April the 10th, we were at $303,605. We've since gotten 2 more months worth of revenue in since when I put this information together on April 10th. And so if we just project out what we brought in this year, plus what we brought in for the same period last year, we're coming in right around that 497 figure. Might be a little high, might be a little bit low, but I've projected basically no growth for the rest of the year. I hope I answered your question.
Well, I think when we get to I strongly disagree with your figures.
Okay.
I think, I'd rather be a very conservative than not, but that's just me, so.
Well, the simple direct answer to your question is that we took a look at what we brought in so far this fiscal year, and then we simply added what we brought in for the same months that are remaining in this year with no change, no growth. So we assumed it'd be exactly the same. And that's the projection for fiscal 22-23. And then the projection for next year is just a 2% increase on that.
You're projecting a 6.67 in ABC profits and a 10.24 in utility sales tax. So,
and those are also consistent with what we either brought in last year or expect to bring in this year. But if you think that they're too aggressive, we certainly can adjust those. We would have to identify.
I'm just 1 of 5 here.
No, but all of you. I mean, we can adjust these numbers if you think that they're.
I'm just trying to prevent budget amendments after April next year when you come to us and say, look, we overestimated revenue. I'd rather be on the conservative side of the budget than not. That's just me.
Understood.
Okay.
I think this is conservative, but obviously it's a continuum, right? Depends on where you fall in that spectrum.
Well, you said it was very ultra conservative or whatever your term was last budget. I disagree with that, but anyway.
Well, in the sense that you all expected 409,000 and you had brought in 461,000 the year before. So that's really playing it safe. And if that's what you want to do, that's perfectly fine. That's a reasonable policy.
I'm just 1 of 5. I've always been conservative. That's a proven method for municipal government is conservative approach. That's all.
Understood.
That's the only questions I have on your revenue.
All right. Any other questions or concerns? All right. Starting with the expenditures, I'll try to take you through these pretty quick, at least in terms of my comments. The expenditures are behind tab number 4. The governing body starts on page 41. And so one of the things that's important to me, if you look at page 41 just for a second, I'm listing the services provided for each department. I'm listing what our goals are as an organization for fiscal 23-24, because I'm trying to communicate to you all and trying to communicate to the public what we're trying to achieve. So you'll see that page on page 41 for the governing body. You'll see a similar page for every department. And I'm hoping to just communicate to you all what it is we want to accomplish. To me, this is as much a work plan for next year for our organization as it is the nuts and bolts of the numbers and so forth. So, and then that's just summary information, breaking it down by category. on page 42, you'll see a box there called Service Statistics and Goals. I'm trying to implement a system whereby we're tracking a lot of the data across the whole organization. And so you'll see a chart like this for each department as well, so that we can demonstrate to you all how the workload has changed, what our goals are going forward. It's not as far along as I would like it to be, but I wanted to present it at least in this budget so that it give you a sense of what I'm working toward in the future. You see the authorized positions, and then you see a couple of graphs. The line items are on page 43. And so I'll try to hit the line item budgets in each of these departments for you. In the governing body, you can see it's really deceiving. It shows a decrease of $587,806. That's not real. That's because of the way that we budgeted for the American Rescue Plan Act funds. And we've now moved those into multi-year funds so that it'll be easier to make the comparisons in the future. If you look at the budget, in this particular case, it would be wise to consider the amended budget total of $95,000 for fiscal 22-23, and then look at the recommended for 23-24, $66,728. That's a more honest comparison of the 2 years' budgets. And really, there's two big things going on in here. One is that the legal fees were budgeted at $39,295 in the current year. I'm recommending $24,000, basically the equivalent of $2,000 per month going forward. I think that's about how we'll come in for the current year. I actually think it'll be less than that, but I wanted to pad it a little bit just in case an issue comes up that requires more legal services. Then the other big thing in there is the audit and accounting fees. You'll see a decrease of $10,600. Some of that is because about $3,000 of that expense is moved to the administration budget because it's end of year financial services provided by a third party CPA. Part of it is because the number is probably going to come in more like 15,000 instead of 25,000 for next year. You can see all the others that are in there. There's funding included for the election this year. Obviously, we're going to have one of those. So if there's any questions or concerns about that, we certainly can talk about those.
I got one question. Sandy, are all of your line items in this budget?
Yes.
All of them?
As far as I'm aware. I mean, I'm sitting here looking as he's talking where I'm at.
All of your accounting line items? Okay.
He
It just seems like.
names them different, I mean, he calls them a little different, but yes.
Okay.
There's actually,
Go through all departments now is what I'm asking you.
There's a
all
few
of the
that he's
expenses.
added, for example, like waste industries, he breaks them out a little bit more detailed and he wants it broken out, and I will be breaking them out
Okay.
starting July, so that when you get your reports, they will be broken.
Okay. They just look a little bit.
there are none that have been eliminated. There are some that have been added so that we can give you more detail on some of the things. So, and the other thing I would say too is this does not have the stormwater or the Cape Carteret Trail expenses in here. Those are in a separate capital project account that we'll talk about too. It's further on down in the budget. So that's the big stuff in the governing body budget. When you get to the admin budget, it starts on page 44. The actual line items are on page 47. You'll see there's a pretty significant increase in there. It's an increase of about almost $152,000 next year. And so there's a lot going on in there. Some of that, quite frankly, is the town manager salary and benefits that you all approved. And you'll see that reflected in the salaries and the benefit lines. When you look at the operating line items, and this is a great example of your question, Steve, you'll see that there's $27,816 in the recommended budget next year for information technology, $10,088 for digital business tools, $3,000 for financial software, and $6,600 for accounting fees. And so of that $6,600 for accounting fees, $3,000 of that used to be in the governing body budget. Because it's really more administrative type services, moved it into the administration budget. And then there's $3,600 in there for third-party bank reconciliations for the course of the year. And that's one of the findings in our audit report last year, that we needed to better segregate the duties. So we've included that in there. So those four line items are really the big changes in administration. in addition to the salaries and benefits.
I noticed you don't include the new hire, you just hired the town planner in the administration. Is there a reason for that?
It's in the development services budget.
Is there a reason it's not in the administration?
We can put it there if you want. I'm trying to isolate that cost so that you and the public are more aware of what those services cost. We have a cost center in the current year called planning. And so I just changed the title to development services because to me, it's really a combination of lots of different things. It's all the plan reviews, it's all the code enforcement, it's a wide variety of things, but we can put it in there if you want. We
No,
just simply put it.
You do the accounting the way you want to do it. I just asked the question.
So on page 48 starts that development services budget, which again, it used to be called planning. And you'll see in the current year budget, there was a total of $21,078 appropriated. That was a portion of the Public Works Director's time. It was some other odds and ends expenses. I've simply called it development services. It includes a new full-time position that the board authorized back in, I believe it was in March. So the total, all of the line items are included on page 51. And so the total budget recommended is $75,707. You can see the bulk of that is in salaries. It's an increase of $32,494 in the salaries, $19,035 in the benefits. That's also a little bit deceiving because if you recall, we actually eliminated a position in Public Works and created this position. So the net increase associated with the new position compared to the old position is probably somewhere in the $18,000 or $19,000 range when you really break it all down. And so we had a half a position budgeted in here, and then we had 3.5 in Public Works. We now have 1 position in here and 3 in Public Works. Other than that, there's just a few operating line items included in there, and again, the total is $75,707.
Or do you intend on giving her travel mileage for a personal vehicle? Is that what you're doing?
I've plugged in $3,600 in there, and that's the plan at the moment. I may yet make one of the spare police vehicles available for that person. I'm still kind of evaluating that. I put that in there just to be safe. So, if there's a need to identify any reductions, that may be somewhere to consider. It's really kind of a placeholder. The police department starts on page 52. The line items are on page 55. The total amount recommended for next year, $737,894. That's an increase of $58,675 over the current year. Over the current year adopted budget. Part of that is $20,000 in part-time funds, hoping that we can recruit some reserve officers to reduce the burden on our full-time officers right now. One of the things that came up at your meeting last Monday was the idea of possibly shifting the school resource officer to the county, to the sheriff, and possibly taking our current school resource officer, who's a town employee, and putting him out on the streets. So I did speak with the sheriff last week, and he's willing to consider that. He felt like there's a way to make that work. For your purposes, you would need to identify about $53,000 of other reductions or revenue enhancements to cover that, because that school resource officer is primarily funded by a $36,000 grant plus about $17,000 from the other municipalities that have children in White Oak Elementary School. So if we moved Officer DiStefano back into the department out on the streets, we'd have a $53,000 revenue hole we'd need to make up. I would submit to you that we could probably reduce that $20,000 part-time figure, so the real number might be $33,000-ish, give or take. So I think that's an option we can consider if that's something you all want to pursue. The sheriff can't make that decision all by himself, but he was supportive of it when I spoke with him. So other than that, just various changes in the line items. One thing you should know is that this budget assumes that we would move the police department into this town hall building next fiscal year. So there are some slight savings on the utilities and internet costs and things like that that are factored into this budget as well. But otherwise, it's pretty much business as usual in the police department.
I'll make one comment about the SRO. If we did give it back to the county, we would be getting a full-time police officer 12 months out of the year instead of 9.
That's correct. Yeah,
So there'd be some benefit there.
absolutely.
But I'm gonna make a statement here. I'll just run this by everybody. I think there's 3 or 4 police officers that are grossly underpaid. I would like to see a minimum wage established, not only for them, but for other workers. I think it's unfair to pay them that kind of money and they put their life on the line every day. I wouldn't do it with you.
Yeah, I think
I think there needs to be a minimum wage established for a police officer of $50,000.
okay.
I don't know if I know we can't probably make it this budget, but I ran some numbers. I think there's 3 police officers making less than that. And 1 public works making less than 40,000. If we gave them all public works to 40,000, police officers 50, I think it's $14,000. I may be wrong.
Yeah, I mean, so that's certainly something that we can pursue in the future. So I was going to mention this at the end, but I probably should have mentioned it at the beginning. So as I described last week, there's a 5.3% cost of living increase plugged in for all town employees except for myself. And so our lowest salary in the police department next year would be $44,226. And so if the board's goal is to take that to 50,000 or whatever number you think is the right number, we can work toward that. Obviously, that's more expense, and we'll have to identify some reductions or revenue enhancements. So.
We struggle to keep manpower over there. And I don't want to get in a bidding war with the rest of the town, but in today's time, what they got to go through, $40,000 is nothing. They should be paid more.
You all obviously were a part of this last year. My understanding is you gave pretty sizable increases to the police department last year.
The town manager and the police chief, I think, did a study, a comparison study.
Yep.
But yeah, I don't think it's enough.
It's incredibly difficult to attract and retain law enforcement officers.
It is.
There's no doubt. So.
But I'll leave that up to the 2 former chiefs here to weigh in on that.
If we could just go back just a minute on the SRO. I hate that we will lose, that we would have to end up paying a lot of money for that full-time officer, use that money from this grant money when we could possibly find a part-time officer to do SRO at the school. Therefore, we could maintain the monies, but some of the monies could come back in here. Am I correct?
Yeah, so we've been attempting to identify either retired or part-time officers to maybe share the school resource officer duties. It's just been very difficult to find people in general. And then it's also been difficult to find people who have the right certifications to be a school resource officer. We basically found ourselves in a position where we'd have to wait a year before we'd have anyone who was capable of doing that, if we could even find the part-time guys in the first place.
Well, going with what Steve just said, if we offer a decent hourly rate for SRO officer, you won't have no problem finding one. That way they're off during the summertime. They'll eat that up. But we got to find what that happy medium would be to pay that officer what per hour. That way we can still maintain the grant money coming into the town.
Did you say you ran the numbers and it was only like
I think
14,000
bring minimum wage, I call it,
up to, yeah,
50 grand, and minimum wage in public works to 40.
yeah. That's not a lot of money. I mean,
what would be
that's,
the increase of the whole entire package?
Yeah,
Retirement, because you got to add all that
Right.
with that.
Right.
14,000.
So basically, you can just add another 25% for the percentage-driven benefit. So it's what, another $3,000-4,000 or so.
They're saying about 20 grand.
Probably, I'll tell you real quick. Probably about 13,000 in the police department, and another 25% of that. So you're looking at what, probably another 3,000 or so. So maybe 16,000-17,000 in the police department. When you look at public works, you said the goal was 40.
Yeah, there's only one position over there that's making less than 40,000, I think.
Yeah, so, so you might require another expense of maybe another $3,500, $4,000. And we certainly can identify whatever adjustments you want to make that happen. You then wind up with some compression with other folks in the department who maybe have been here longer, who are earning maybe just a little bit more than the new people under that scenario. So you probably want to have some separation.
Salary now for all our positions, correct?
We have,
Theoretically, we have a minimum.
correct.
Okay. I'm just asking to bump the minimum up. That's all I'm asking.
And we certainly can consider that. The only thing I just want you to be aware of is that if you do that and you bump up all of the lower paid employees up against the higher paid employees, you get into what's known as compression. And sometimes that causes concerns within the organization if people don't feel like there's enough separation.
I forget I brought it up. I mean, I'm just trying to help retain some police officers.
Yeah, I'm not saying you can't do it. I'm just simply pointing out to you the concerns that come up with that kind of thing. It's your decision whether or not you want to do it.
And I don't think the public is aware of the turnover rate we have. If they were, they'd be a little bit interested in what I'm saying. Make something happen. I don't know how you could do it, but if I was working for Eschbach over there, and I was one of the higher paid guys, I'd be happy for the rest of the officers to get a pay increase. They're getting 5.3% anyway, right?
So again, we can adjust it in whatever way you'd like. I mean, my understanding is you all did a very thorough comparison last year and made those adjustments to make it competitive with other departments. If you want us to go through another exercise and do that again,
No,
we can.
Well, the only way to really avoid compression is to maintain the spread. So if we up the minimum and just focus on the spread,
Spread's not that great.
it would be interesting in knowing what that number is too, because all we're really talking about is, a difference of 16,000 in police and 4,000 in public works. It would just be interesting to know what that spread would be. You don't have to do it right now.
No. Just for example, if you made that change, I'm sure that if that's the board's will, we can figure out a way to pay for that. If that's what you all would like to collectively do, we can figure that out and make it happen. But when it comes to dealing with other individuals in the department, then that number becomes a lot larger. And like, for example, we've got a very seasoned officer who next year with the 5.3 increase would be making almost $53,000 next year. And so if you've got that person with considerably more experience making 53 and everybody else making 50, that just sometimes causes concerns internally in the organization. You may ultimately say that's not the priority and that's not the biggest concern. That's perfectly fine. That's your call. But my job is to make sure that you understand the ramifications of these kind of things.
Well, let me ask you this. Maybe Eschbach can answer this question. So an officer is working here. Is there incentives as far as if you acquire this certification, instructor certification, or whatever certification you obtain a 4-year degree while working here, or a 2-year degree, we get bumps of salary or increase?
Yes, so my understanding is the town doesn't have that sort of system in place at the moment, but we can work toward that in the future. I mean,
That would probably be a big help in maintaining, because they have something to work toward where they get more.
Yeah.
Their pay is based on rank, sergeant, detective, lieutenant.
Well, I think we should implement some type of,
Patrol officers way down here.
Yeah.
Well, you could do and here again, a lot of towns have that where you'll have what we're doing, which is the base cost of living adjustment, but have a performance based, have some money for that. So the employee that, stands out or puts forth better effort has another opportunity to have some type of wage increase during the year.
I've seen that performance. We've given lump sums that you recall other times. I personally didn't think it worked out, but that's just my opinion.
Can I ask, Ishbak, how many officers have their advanced certificate? Is that? So, that's a prime example, got one officer with an advanced certificate. To get that advanced certificate, you gotta have experience and training under their belt. So if they get, it should be a tier, more they work, more they get. It kind of causes an incentive instead of just giving them the money to have something to work toward. But on the back side of this, we gotta have enough money in here for them to be able to take time off to go to these schools too. So that's the flip side of that. So I think we need to look at something that's going to be more constructive to where these officers have something to look toward, but also get the money in here for them to be able to go get these certifications in schools. And that way we can acquire betterment of our community.
Well, we get told
Please.
time and time again, Jeff, by previous chief, there's nobody out there because we can't pay it.
With this will help. If they know they can go to schools,
agree
I
with
can
that.
witness to that. I mean, in my job before, when I opened that up to my officers, they were on it. And they were always requesting, can I go to this school? Can I go to this school? Yeah, you gotta have overtime available to pay the officers or have extra officers, which is on the part-time side, to handle the extra work. But you got vacation, you got to throw in there, you got sick leave to throw in there that they're gonna be going on too. So I think it's something we need to look at.
Well, we had an incentive program last year that we were, like our clerk. Do you remember we were talking about paying extra for certifications? We discussed that a year or 2 years.
Yeah, we didn't do anything though, I
Yeah,
don't
2
think.
years ago. we talked
Yeah,
about
we
that.
discussed all of that.
Never got around
I
it.
understand the performance type thing.
Yep.
But I'm asking for a base salary increase. That's all. That's what I'm saying. And like I said, you heard time and time again, they don't exist. We compete against Moorhead, the sheriff's department, Emerald Isle, which has got a endless checking account over there. So we can't compete. So, but that's up to y'all. I just threw it out there. I personally feel they're grossly underpaid. That's just my opinion.
All of them are in a sense, if you look at it.
That's just my opinion.
So there's a couple of ways that we could go about that. One is that we certainly could come up with some sort of career advancement plan where there's a salary increase tied to certain certifications or other years of service or whatever criteria you want to establish. That's one approach. Another approach would be to allocate a pot of money to the town manager to make targeted increases. So in our organization, we don't do merit increases. We just do cost of living increases. So there's a 5.3% cost of living increase in there for all town employees, including police and public works, which are most of the workforce. Other communities will have a cost of living increase and maybe they'll have 0 to 5% available for merit increases. We don't do that, but that's something that we could consider. So I think you got 3 options there that we could take a look at. If you want us to develop something and bring it back to you, I'm happy to do that.
Well, I think this is going to take some discussion, and it may be something we want to not include in this budget. But soon after we adopt the budget, we need to start talking about that kind of stuff.
Well,
I agree with Steve. We definitely need to look at what the minimum hiring rate is. I'd like to see it bumped up. However, Frank is absolutely right. You gotta look across the board. You can't just look at the minimum. Because if you got somebody been here 8, 10, 12 years, and all of a sudden the new guy's jumped up, he's just right behind him.
they don't believe.
Yeah, you sort of have to bump everybody.
Well,
So you do have to look across the board.
also, Frank, I need to mention the fact that, and you have talked about this, we're under a lease program for our cars, one that you do not like, as you expressed in public. But I don't see any kind of capital outlay or any kind of preparation for when the leases are up. And for those that don't remember, I know good and well Don remembers, it was before his time, before him. They bought that entire fleet of police cars and drained our hurricane and sewer fund to do so. We don't want to be caught like that again. So if we're not going to lease those police cars, or you don't feel like we need to, shouldn't we be laying money aside now, even though we got 2 years left on the lease to start to buy those cars?
Couple thoughts. Basically, yes, I think we should. And that's one of the things I mentioned to you during my comments last Monday, that we need to come up with a plan for that. I think we've got a little bit of time to figure that out. Whether you like them or don't like them, we're stuck with this lease program for another 3.5 years for 3 of the cars, 2.5 years for 2 of the cars. So by the time we get to that time period, we need to have come up with a plan, and we need to have identified the funds to replace those cars on some regular schedule that we feel comfortable with going forward. You'll have that 55,000 or so, that capacity will be there in the future. I think you're going to need to add a little bit more than that, to be honest with you. And so, yes, we absolutely need to figure that out. I chose not to do that for this budget because of the other goals that we were trying to achieve. But we certainly can take another look at that if that's what you'd like to do.
Can we,
And I guess too, the fortunate thing is everything's in good shape. It's all brand new, right? So we're in good shape in the short term, but we need to be thinking about it for the long term.
you go back for just a second, you brought up about the public works. We just talked about the police department career advancement. So what could be something to help the public works side? Well, they don't have a career advancement plan that you can actually go to. So is there been a study to obtain information about their job and comparison of other people, other towns and their pay scales?
There has not been as part of this budget. My understanding is you all did a study of the whole organization last year with the budget and made some pretty significant adjustments for various positions last year. So, okay.
And I'm just, because we talked about police department in depth, I don't want to leave those folks out either, or even the town hall folks.
Sure.
So you've got to have certifications as well in here. So maybe you can come up with something, Frank, just kind of give us an idea with the public works, police, and the town as well, some type of career advancement plan.
Absolutely can come up with that if that's what you'd like
I
to see.
think, would that be?
Yeah, I think though, it's gonna take some time and discussion, so I think we.
Well, no, we can't do this tonight.
That's what I'm saying,
Yeah.
no, I'm thinking we need to just take that away from the budget and give him ample time, 3, 4, 5 months, come up with some kind of, I just wanted to bring it up, that I felt like they were underpaid.
And that would be my recommendation too, is to take our time on it and get it right and not make it a part of the
Don't put it on
budget.
the back
So,
burner.
sure.
I think it's very important that we maintain our employees.
Going back to the police department, you're talking about looking down here on, uniforms, $3,200. And then talking about hiring some part-timers. That's gonna eat that $3,200 slam up. If we hire some part-timers, especially look at doing something at the school, or if we do the career advancement, we're gonna have somebody have to work. So my personal experience with that's definitely not enough money. It costs about $1,400 to $1,800 per person to equip.
Sure.
With uniforms. So you may get 2 people out of that. Not mentioning you got to replace what you got. If you need to, shoes, belts.
Sure.
So I have a concern with that number after looking at it more in depth. And then is $20,000 in the salary side for part-time. Is that going to be significant enough if you're paying somebody $25, $30 an hour for a part-time officer to help maintain what we're looking at doing in the future?
Yeah, so I'm doing some quick math here real quick, so bear with me for a second. So essentially, our lowest paid officer makes about $20.32 an hour. And so I wouldn't want to pay our part-time officers much more than that. It probably would depend on their qualifications and their experience and so forth. So, yeah, is it going to be enough? Actually, my gut tells me it's probably more than enough, because we're probably not going to be able to attract people. And I wish that wasn't the answer I was giving you, but I was trying to create some pot of money there so that we could actively recruit part-time officers and try to reduce the burden on our folks a little bit. But it's just so hard.
Jeff, what are we doing different that's gonna change that uniform budget? I mean, actually spent only $2,800.
If you go out and act, if we actually get some part-time officers, that's gonna eat that up, because you gotta have the uniforms, and you talk about leather gear, as you well know.
Yeah, that's fine. I just was.
Yeah. And I'm surprised that number, that 900, is $43, is it 40, that's ammunition, excuse me.
28, 13, 21, 22.
I'm surprised it's
Yeah,
not more, because, I mean, the shoes for the guys, S-Block, what y'all paying for boots and shoes?
Usually around $100.
Yeah.
I agree with Jeff. I've said this all along. Police department's our number one service to citizens. If we're gonna have a full-time police department, we need to equip it and take care of it.
absolutely.
I don't disagree with that. But we,
I thought the budget was a little lean myself, but,
I mean, I think it's comfortable what we're looking at doing, but I'm just thinking, as we've been sitting here talking, moving forward, we're talking about part-time help, part-time officers, we're going to pay them to come in. And we're looking at doing something for the school, put a part-time in there and pull that full-timer out. You talk about more uniforms, more money, more training, more education, and then are we gonna be comfortable enough with this to move forward and make changes during the year until we get to the next budget?
I think that'd be enough until we can make the changes. I foresee some big changes, so, especially the SRO.
That too, and let's think about this too, is we're fixing to get a new chief here, hopefully sometime soon. What's he gonna want to do?
Sure.
We've been there, new chief comes in, he sees things he wants to like to have done or change, that's gonna cost money. We're looking at moving forward here, how we gonna approach it.
If we get a new chief, I don't even know if we're gonna get one or not. I haven't heard anything. If we get one, that he's gonna have to adhere to the budget that we vote on next month. Now, the next budget, next year, he might have to say something.
I think what I would suggest to you, if we do, if the board decides to request that the county take on the school resource officer, my recommendation to you would be to reduce the part-time funding and basically invest it in the $53,000 expense to convert our officer back to a street officer. And that would provide, I think, a really great enhancement to the staffing in the police department, reduce the burden, achieve the same goal that I was trying to achieve somewhat with the part-time salary. So
Sounds great to me.
Whatever y'all want to do. I'm just trying to throw everything out there so
And I'm
everybody can
wondering, I
see.
mean, if you're talking about the uniforms, and if some money need to be shifted, I'm looking at $4,000 pre-employment screening. Chief, when you're hiring a new guy, the majority of it is just legwork doing the background. As far as actual cost, you've got to have them drug screened, and if they're just coming out of BLET, you've got to have a psych eval.
And physical.
How much are you looking at per officer, and what other costs are involved that maybe have changed in the last 10 years since I retired?
If there's background checks in other states or counties that they live, those are generally pretty inexpensive. I think the psychological test is about $650, something like that. Not sure off the top of my head what the drug screen costs. Those are the primary expenses there.
So that number also includes funding for a new police chief to do the background checks on whoever that person may be.
So did you just say that we would use some of this 20,000 part-time budget to account for the 53,000 deficit that we would encounter if we remove the SRO?
That would be my recommendation to
Okay.
you, yeah.
Well, I thought
And actually, it would really be more like 25,000 because there's about $5,000 spread across the benefits. So make it a little bit easier to accomplish that.
What ASIN would have to do would be to get it on the board of commissioners agenda,
That's correct.
and the board of commissioners rule on it. So you're talking the way they've operated probably 3 or 4 months. So there again, we wouldn't have time to make those changes in this budget.
Well, I think if it's something that you want to pursue, my goal would be to get it finalized before the school year starts in August, and that may be possible. Again, I don't know the politics behind it all, but it seems reasonable.
That's just very doable. We had talked about this before. Yeah, that'd be great.
But this is to solve a police force personnel issue. This has nothing really to do with, yeah, the county or anything like that. This is us saying, you know what, we need this guy to do.
Well, it's time, as I said in the last meeting, I think it's time for the county to accept the responsibility of the
Right.
county school and relieve us of that. I'm not gonna call it burden, but relieve us of that. It's their responsibility, and if we can do that and get that officer back over here and relieve some of the pressures that SBOC's having manpower wise, I'm all for it.
Yeah, so a couple things that might be helpful to you. One is that all of the other school resources, so first of all, every school in the county has a school resource officer now. The ones that are in unincorporated areas in the county are paid for completely by the county. The ones that are in a municipality, i.e. Moorhead, Beaufort, Newport, what have you, they're actually using the exact same model that Cape Carteret uses. And our model is based on the number of kids coming out of each town going to the school. And in reality, the county pays the vast, vast majority of the cost of the school resource officer for us. So when I talked with the sheriff about it, he was very open-minded about it, felt like we could make it work if you all wanted to pursue that. The only thing that might be an issue, and I think we could probably work through it, is that it will be different. We'd be the only school in a municipality that's funded this way, but that doesn't mean it can't happen. That's something the county commissioners would have to set that precedent. So.
But, and I understand we would still, correct me if I'm wrong, that's why we'd still maintain traffic control over there twice a day, correct? If that's all right with the county, or would we?
We might not.
Yeah,
I'm not sure. I know they don't, was it Raw Creek where Phillips is at, directing traffic?
Because that's a county school too. So.
Yeah, well, it's a county school.
Yeah, I'm talking about without it being a municipality. Probably the worst case scenario, we would have to maybe assist with traffic direction.
Well, yeah.
Okay.
Well,
Good to hear Ace is on board with that.
No, I just didn't. Why would we still direct traffic if, I mean, what is that guy gonna do? Just sit up at the school and watch us direct
Well,
traffic?
sometimes we have 2 or 3 people over there. So I don't know if it take, one of my officers got hit by a car over there, didn't he? Wasn't it Bill McKinney?
Bottom line is that highway still runs through our town, and if that school resource officer, that might be county sheriff or whoever, if he's not there, we got a problem out there.
Oh, okay.
Officers gotta be open.
I would assume that we would have to put at least one person.
But that's only for like an hour.
No,
Not that, yeah.
Probably half hour in the morning, half hour.
Yeah.
Okay.
How long in there? That's long.
That's just part of the.
Yeah.
Policing here. All right.
All right, the Public Works budget begins on page 56. The line items are on page 59. The highlights here, you'll see a decrease in the salaries of $7,066. That's because of that position that I talked about earlier that we converted into the planner position under development services. When you look at the line items, you'll see a $25,000 decrease in small tools and equipment. That's really just a timing issue. We had some funding included in the current year 22-23 budget for the skid steer and some of the other items that go along with that. That actually got paid for in the prior year. So the money's not going to be spent this year. It was tied to a one-time expense. You'll see 5,000 in there for the street sweeping. That's something that I mentioned last week. We would contract out that service 4 times a year on Highway 24. And then you see the enterprise fleet management decrease of 18,599. Initially last year, we were thinking about leasing a new pickup truck. In talking with Ryan Hutchinson, we decided to go the route of the utility vehicle that the board approved several months ago. And so we don't have that enterprise fleet payment going forward. And as Commissioner Martin mentioned, I'm not a big fan of the enterprise program. I'll be looking at other ways to finance our vehicles going forward, but we'll have to figure that out. Other than that, it's pretty much business as usual in the Public Works Department. Keep in mind that some of their expenses are scattered in other cost centers and solid waste and parks and recreation, public buildings and grounds, et cetera. But This is the Public Works bill budget.
Well, I see one item here that if we absolutely had our back against the wall, balance this budget and put some money somewhere else is, and I know it's a pet peeve of yours and it is mine too, cigarette dumps all over Highway 24, that street sweeping at $5,000.
Okay.
We ready for that?
Well, to Ryan's credit, his staff made a great effort last year to clean up Highway 24, and it was really a way that we could do it more efficiently to contract it out. It's 4 times a year. It's basically $1,250 per quarter to do that.
If the end of the discussion needs $5,000, I'd be one to take that $5,000 and put it somewhere else. Another thing, where Jeff pointed out $3,200 for uniforms, PD, which has 7 officers. We got $3,200 for 3 people in public works uniform. So I don't know.
They just get a lot of wear and tear, beat up, being out there, in mud, dirt, sun, rain gear, boots, pants, shirts.
Well, I know. I saw Hayden crawl up underneath the house the other day and come out looking like he'd been running to a dishwasher. But I understand. I've done that kind of work, but I'm saying $3,200 for 3 people, $3,200 for 7 people. I'm sure they clean their uniforms. You don't wear them twice, do you? That's fine. Don't answer that.
3 or 4 times.
That just stuck out. Just stuck out.
Yeah, so
His budget's real lean, Ryan. It looks good. I just didn't agree with the $5,000 for street sweeping if our back got against the wall later on down.
the street maintenance budget, the line items are on page 64. And it's one line item. Basically, it's contracting out the street resurfacing. There's $105,378. As I mentioned last week, that's a combination of what we expect from PAL bill funds next year, plus the motor vehicle special tax that would require a very direct policy change by the board to allocate that money for street maintenance in the future. That basically, I think, is going to get us somewhere between 1/2 and 3/4 of a mile of resurfacing next year. My goal is a mile. One idea for you all to consider in the future is possibly increasing that special motor vehicle tax. If you increase it from $5 to the statutory maximum of $30, it would get you around $72,000 more. Something to think about if you want to identify additional funding. Otherwise, we can identify additional changes to the budget, expenditure cuts, or other revenue enhancements. But that was the one that I thought was maybe most logical for street maintenance. So
You talking about a special vehicle tax or the MOTV tax? Which one?
they're the same thing. I'm using
Well,
a
the
different
MOTV
term.
tax, I think we were supposed to have that discussion, it's meant for the trail maintenance, not paving.
Yeah, I understand that, and we can keep it that way if you'd like, but my recommendation to you is to change that position and allocate it for street maintenance going forward.
Well, if we're going to increase taxes on the vehicle tax, why in the world would we give a 4% tax break?
I'm not suggesting we would do that this year. I'm suggesting to you that it's something for you all to think about in the future years.
That's got me concerned now. So.
How many miles of street didn't need paving?
We have about 20.1 miles of town maintained streets. And so I was trying to establish a 20-year life cycle for every segment. So I was trying to get to a mile per year. You all just approved a mile last week, a little more than that. This is only going to get you somewhere between 1/2 and 3/4.
Historically, Charlie, we have never had enough money in the PAL bill to pay to keep up the paving in this town. Don, it's been here a while. No, it's been a struggle. I don't know what the answer is, but I certainly don't want to assess another tax on it. I've always thought that MOTV tax was Gallus tax anyway, for the simple reason it doesn't apply to people that live part-time in town, and there's a number of those. Their vehicles are registered where they live. People live in town pay that $5 per vehicle tax.
Sure.
So I've always thought it was unfair anyway, but I don't know what the answer is for paving, but we don't have enough money to keep the paving up. 20 years is ridiculous to make a round in 20 years.
It's theoretical, right? I mean, in reality, Charlie, we're going to basically apply the funds where the greatest needs exist each year. But hypothetically, you want to do 1 mile per year. So.
We have in the past, did a budget amendment before, like 2 years ago.
You certainly can. I would just encourage the board that any money that you take from fund balance to spend it on a one-time expense as opposed to an annual recurring maintenance expense. But you can do that when it's a good year and you've got some money. I think the town has done that. I'm really looking at the street resurfacing as just an annual recurring expense. It's really a maintenance item to me.
So you're contemplating next year asking for an increase in MOTV tax, is that what you're saying?
So I'm not asking for anything. I'm simply suggesting to you all that I'm not even recommending it. I'm suggesting to you all that that's an area where you could allocate additional funds for street maintenance if you want. The other alternatives are to reduce expenditure somewhere else or to raise property taxes. I mean, those are really the three options that you have at your disposal. Or I guess the fourth one is just not do a mile per year. Plan on doing a half a mile or whatever you think is the right
Well,
number.
I think charges are gonna go up yearly.
It's tied to oil.
So
Yeah.
it'll be a good amount 3 years.
Yeah.
So that's another issue that needs some more discussion.
What do other municipalities do? I mean, is the Powell bill designed to be able to handle that, and we're just somehow not making it work, or?
No, I think probably you'd find most communities, the POW bill is not sufficient to meet their paving goals.
So then they
Certain-
supplement with something else.
They'll either not do it and kick the can down the road, or they'll supplement with some other revenues.
Just remember, it wouldn't take anything but a majority vote in the legislature to do away with the power bill. Sorry.
And this,
Disappear altogether is what you're saying.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying, and anyway, it's always been an issue.
yeah, and this revenue estimate actually includes a 10% increase in the POW bill because the legislature has committed to increasing the total appropriation for POW bill. So we factored that in. It's another $8,000 plus or minus. So.
So what you're saying in the bottom line is short of a tax increase, one way or another, that's it for payment, right?
No, what I'm saying to you is you can either live with only a half mile or 3/4 of a mile, whatever, 105,000 you get. Yeah, so you can either live with that number, or you can raise taxes, or you can identify expenditure reductions elsewhere in the budget and allocate that money for street resurfacing. Or you can consider something like the motor vehicle special tax, maybe raising that or some other fee that you think might be appropriate. But I mean, those are the options that you have available to you. And I purposely did not recommend an increase in that motor vehicle special tax this year because I think it needs a lot of discussion by the Board of Commissioners. And I just want that to be something you can think about for the future.
Well, I think,
Are there not grants for that? There's
Yeah.
grants for everything else, but there not grants for paving.
Yeah, not for street resurfacing. That's basically what the POW bill is intended to be, sort of a state grant.
if you go to changing the concept of why that tax was put on the people to start with, it was sold as trail maintenance. You go to changing that kind of stuff, I think you're asking for controversy in that. So I wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole myself.
I've had some people, two of them are my parents, they didn't like the fact they were paying taxes for a trail. They rather see it for the streets, so you'll have that argument as well. I'm saying. It's a lot, I would say a lot of the older people, who don't use the trail, rather see a nicer street that they can drive on or walk on, to get where they want to go.
Well, the last thing I want to do is fund another referendum.
I don't think it should be any referendum anywhere, I don't like referendum.
But I think, I mean, that's ultimately the five of you's job as the policymakers is to decide those kinds of questions.
So how many, do any of us know how many vehicles are actually taxed in the town of Cape Carteret?
Yeah, it's right around 2,600 or so, give or take. I don't have it right at my fingertips,
And
but
so
it's
it's
right around.
$5 per vehicle.
Correct, yeah.
For a licensed vehicle.
Yeah.
What did you do in Emerald Isle to bolster your payment efforts over and above what the POW bill allocated? You didn't have an MOTV tax over there.
Yeah, we did not have that. That's a relatively new thing. Cape Carteret's one of the few communities that have that, yeah. So in Emerald Isle, we allocated additional funds to get to our goal over there, which was 2.3 miles. At one point in time, the PAL bill was sufficient to meet that goal. And then quite frankly, in some of the later years, we just kicked the can down the road. We funded enough mileage based on the revenues that we had from the PAL bill. So it was a mixture of all those things. Public buildings and grounds starts on page 65. Is the line items are on page 67. This all basically falls under the public works umbrella. Really, the most significant change is there was a total of $61,431 for building repairs and maintenance in the current year budget. Essentially, we will not spend that this year. My understanding that there was some contemplation of potentially putting a new roof on the police station, maybe some other HVAC improvements over there. As we've discussed before, I'm working in the long term to replace that building in some way. So I don't intend to move forward with any improvements to that building unless the board tells me that's the strategy that we're going to pursue. So you see that reduction of 51,000. You will see if you look at the projected total for for fiscal year 22-23, under building improvements, there's $30,000 projected. That's the money identified in the current year's budget for whatever renovations we would do in this building to accommodate the police station. So that's the money, essentially taking the money that was originally budgeted for a new roof on the police station and some other improvements, spending it on the improvements to this building to move the police station in here, if the board's comfortable with that. And I hope to bring a construction contract to you at your June 12th meeting for that work.
Can I ask a question? I want to go back. One of the things that Charlie said, we were just talking about the whole paving thing. What if we tied, I'm sorry to take everybody backwards, what if we tied some of this paving to some of the stormwater to the extent that you can't fix some of these stormwater issues without fixing the road itself? That could be the reason why we're having to pave some of these roads over and over again. Can we tie some of that paving into the stormwater situation?
I think we certainly can, and that's really what we did with the contract that the board approved last week. We included Neptune Drive in that because we're going to resolve the stormwater concerns at the same time and resurface the street. So you could certainly do that. That's not sustainable over the long term. In some ways, that's really just a one-time expense this year that'll get us to the 1 mile. I wouldn't recommend that over the long term.
Right, but I do see that some of these roads just aren't built to very good standards. One example is Quailwood between St. Augustine and Bahia. There is a constant pothole there because the road doesn't drain. I think you just recently cut a section out. They're constantly having to cut sections, but because the road doesn't really crown, it actually sort of is a bowl, and so it sits there. That's just one example. What I'm saying is some of the roads just don't even they wouldn't meet DOT standards. And so that may be the reason why we're spending so much on paving, just throwing that out there. But I think Charlie said it with, can we use something else to do that? And I was curious if we could tie it into some of these stormwater fixes that we're doing.
Yeah, you absolutely can. It's just you're going to run out of the stormwater money at some point, and it won't be sustainable in the long term. So
I think the answer that I would give to that would be after we finish the 12 places, if there's any money left, to just allocate the whole balance to paving the title.
Yeah.
Because we got to spend it anyway and on that.
Yeah.
But I would want to get those 12 spots done. And going with what Frank's done and been able to keep the costs down, there's probably going to be some left over, in my opinion. Because
I hope so. That's what we're working towards. So.
Yeah, I mean, that just, we could identify those places like you just mentioned and put it on the list.
Yep.
It certainly would be.
Yeah, and I guess too, I'm not suggesting you should do this. I just want you to be aware of what your options are. So that pot of money that we have allocated for stormwater improvements, that is completely flexible. This board can spend that money any way that it would like to spend it. With some of the changes that we made, it's completely flexible. You're not tied to the federal requirements on that. So that's something you can think about either in the future when you finish the 12 locations, or even now if you decided that something else was a higher priority. And I'm not suggesting you do that because I know you made that policy decision. I just want you to know what your options are.
Yeah. I just, you chuckled at 20 years and you're absolutely right. I mean, there's no way you can do 1 mile a year and it be sustainable in this town. Yeah. So, but I think we do need to start thinking about where do we make up that difference long term.
There's a lot of future projects we need to be.
Right. I agree. Sorry, I
No.
derailed you. Sorry.
Great conversation.
I think my memory's not to get off topic here, but my memory serves me correctly. I thought Sandy, you had to get permission on how we spent that money.
It's changed since the road committee.
Initially you did, but you remember we changed the category to quote revenue replacement. So essentially in the eyes of the federal government, you're using that money to fund your operating expenses for the current year, and then freeing up the other money to spend however you see fit.
Well, maybe Ryan can identify some of those spots and just add it on the current list we have for stormwater.
Parks and Recreation is starts on page 68. The line items are on page 70. Really the most significant item in here is the increase in the special events line. We bumped that up to $20,000. As I mentioned last week, 10,000 of that is ultimately derived from town funds. 10,000 is from sponsorships. We think that we can secure additional sponsorships this year and hopefully make it a great event. There is also a grand total of $30,000 in capital outlay. 15,000 is to replace to install a bulkhead at one of the water access parks next year, to be determined based on the board's direction. And there's also 15,000 in there for park improvements to be recommended by the Parks Improvements Committee, also ultimately at the board's discretion going forward. So those are the significant items in there. Again, you see the boat ramp lease, $18,000 is budgeted for that. Before the meeting started, I was mentioning to a couple of the members that we bring in about $78,000 in boat ramp permit fees. And so 18,000 goes toward the lease. We certainly have expenses associated with police and with public works and the maintenance and so forth, and also the administrative staff as well. But the bigger that gap gets, the more concern that may cause. Debt service is on page 71, 72. There is none, so that's a great budget. Hope you'll be approving that one. Transfers to other funds, page 73 to 84. Really just showing you what we did this year when we transferred the money out to the capital project funds for stormwater and the trail. And that should make it a lot easier to compare things from year to year instead of rolling funds over, and it gets real confusing. So that's pretty much it for the general fund. If you look behind tab number 7, tab number 5, you'll see the two capital project ordinances that we have for stormwater improvements and for the Cape Carteret Trail. The stormwater improvements, total budget's $877,406. By June 30th of this year, I think we will have spent about $203,000, and that's primarily for the land acquisition that we've talked about in Arden Oaks, at the easement in Arden Oaks, and the easement at the golf course near Sutton Drive, and then it's all the engineering and the permitting. So you'll have about $674,000, I think, remaining on July 1st of this year. By the time we construct the improvements at Sutton Drive, Arden Oaks, Bogue Sound Drive, and the Neptune Drive paving stormwater issues that we talked about, bottom line is once we finish those first four locations, I think we'll have somewhere between $340,000 and $390,000 left for the other 8 locations that were identified. There's actually 9. There's a little bit of overlap in some of the grants and the list the board put together. So I think you'll have $340,000, maybe as much as $400,000 available when we finish the ones that you all have already committed to at this point. On the trail,
That's the 12.
There were 12 it gets a little confusing, so please bear with me. There were 12 locations identified by the board. The grant applications include One of them includes 8 locations. One of them includes 7. Some of them overlap. One of them is not included on the list of 12. So the short answer is by the end of this summer, you should have addressed the problems at 4 of those locations. So I think you'll have $350-ish thousand left to do 9 more locations. And quite frankly, I don't think those will require significant engineering work. I think a lot of those will be solutions that Ryan and his staff and I can come up with and perhaps run our ideas by some local engineers at a relatively low cost and solve those problems. So I think we're sort of tackling the first ones that are maybe a little more complicated. We also were tied to grants that were awarded for engineering work too. As I shared with you over the last couple of months, I was able to get the scope of work amended for those grants so that we can spend that money on construction. So that's going to enable us to maybe implement some of the simpler solutions going forward. Anyway, take home message. I think between 340,000 and 390,000 will be left after you finish the 4 projects we've committed to already. On the trail, the design work's underway, hoping to go out to bid here within the next month or so. We'll have about 352,000 available for construction of that last 1.1 mile segment, give or take. We're also set to hear about the $100,000 grant, and I'm optimistic about that. So maybe we'll have as much as 450,000-ish available. I'm still talking with Paxton Holtz about the property at the tip of the triangle to reduce the length of the path in that area, and may come to you in the future with a purchase contract for that lot. Also exploring some other options. I've talked to a couple of other property owners south of the U.S. Forest Service, or I should say I've talked to one, trying to talk to a second. I'm trying to find a shorter route. So far I'm striking out, but we'll keep trying on those issues. Bottom line is I think we will have enough money to finish the trail later this summer. So the property tax rate, the fee schedule, that is all behind tab number 7. The budget ordinance is included. That's what it would look like based on the recommended budget. It outlines the 21-cent tax increase. Your fee schedule's behind that on page 83 and 84. And so no change, no new fees, no increases. There are, it's a little bit tough to see, they're in bold. You'll see under fiscal 23-24 recommended, there are 4 fees that I recommended just eliminating. One is the 10-cent per page public records request. We don't get very many of those. I think people should have the access to public records whenever they would like. It would really only come into play if someone was being very, very difficult and just asking for reams and reams and reams of paper. We had a fee on the books for a temporary sign permit and a zoning verification. Those are easy to process. We are not collecting a fee for those things. There's not very many of those. And then special event vendor permits, we've not been charging a fee for that also, so it'd be go from 25 to 0. Otherwise, nothing would change. You can see the boat ramp pass fees are identical to what the board approved last year as part of your budget. And so the last item under number 5 on your agenda, employee compensation and benefits. So as I mentioned before, there's a 5.3% increase in for all employees except for myself. There is basically the continuation of all of the employee benefits. The health insurance program would remain exactly as is. There's a net additional cost of almost $7,000 for that. I felt pretty fortunate that it was a 5% increase in the premiums. Looking at offering another option to employees that will cost the exact same amount of money. Also looking at a program whereby employees who have health insurance through their spouse or through a retirement plan from somewhere else, that they can opt out, and we would basically share the savings with the employee in that case. So costs almost $10,000 per year for employee health insurance per employee, and basically looking at keeping things the same going forward. I think from what I've heard from our employees, they're generally pretty pleased with the health insurance plan that we have. The only other item that I had before you all engage in more discussion or tell me whatever changes you'd like to make was just, I mentioned this during the meeting last week. I purposely didn't put together a 5-year capital improvement plan because I feel like we have more work to do. And I need to better understand what your goals are as a board, what the community's goals are, and figure out how to pay for them, right? I think the reality is we're going to need to get grants for a lot of these things going forward. The projects that I had mentioned, all things that we had talked about in the past. So I think certainly we're going to do more stormwater improvements. We're going to start with the remaining 8 or 9 locations on the list, and we'll program those out over the next year or two and so forth. My intent, if the board concurs, is to plan on putting enough money in every year's budget to do 1 bulkhead per year at those water access parks. Typically, they're 60 linear feet, so you're looking $15,000 a year. Probably pretty easy to accomplish if that's a priority for the board. So that would be in the plan. Any park improvements at the non-waterfront parks, I think there's grant funding out there that we can pursue through the Parks and Recreation Trust Fund. If we want to add any new waterfront parks, there's the North Carolina Division of Coastal Management Public Water Access Grants. I could see us applying for those if we can identify property to buy. The land acquisition for a public boat ramp facility, that's going to be a tough one, but there's also possibly grant funding out there for that if we can identify the land. Other bike path segments, we've talked about connecting Bayshore. We've talked about maybe going up to the kayak launch ramp, maybe some crossings over Highway 24. Absolutely going to need grant funding and DOT partnerships to make those happen. If there's any public facilities that you all want to pursue, if and when the town center concept ever takes off and a private developer comes to the town and has a plan for that area, there may be some things you want to do really more long-term right now, but just to get you thinking about that. Likewise, public wastewater treatment, that may be in conjunction with the town center at somewhere down the line. And there may be some grant funding associated with that we can pursue. One of the things, as you know, that I've been working toward is identifying land where we could, in the long term, put a new town government complex many years down the road. We've talked about some of the property in the Triangle. We've talked about some other properties down near the eastern part of town, near Taylor Notion 24. That's something I could see going into a capital plan going forward. And then lastly, the last thing I identified was just the improvements on Highway 24. Trying to improve the pedestrian signals, maybe getting some sort of either overpass or underpass for bicyclists and pedestrians, maybe some new decorative street lighting type things to improve the aesthetics, all of which are going to be completely dependent on DOT and them providing funding for it. So I share those with you because those are all the things that either we've talked about collectively or ideas that I've heard come up in the community. What I hope to do is, as part of next year's budget, is bring you a plan that includes some of these things scheduled out over the next 5 years with a way to pay for them as well. I didn't feel like I could do that this year. I just felt like more work needed to be done. So with that, I will stop. And again, this should be your budget. I gave you my recommendations. Hopefully I listened well to what you all had to say over the course of the last year, but you should adjust it in any way that you think is necessary to achieve your goals.
Frank, if we could go back to public buildings and grounds for just a minute. I know what I heard, but I want to make sure the 30,000 for building improvements.
Give me a page number.
That is for the work that's needed to be done in this building in order to move the police department over here to remodel, et cetera. And it's under the projected this year, 22-23 year end.
Correct.
We're not doing that during this budget cycle, not going forward. Is that correct?
But that's correct. So, essentially we're looking at a pretty significant surplus for the current year. Officially, I projected about $193,000. And as part of that, I made certain assumptions about spending some of that money, of which $30,000 was for the improvements to the town hall. And so I plugged it into the current year projection. I expect to bring you a contract on your June 12th meeting agenda. And so one thing, and I'll certainly explain this more when we get to the June 12th meeting, but I'm sort of looking at it as 2 phases. And initially, I'm just simply trying to make the functional improvements to this building, adding some walls, adding a window, really creating some additional office space so that we can actually fit the police personnel in this building. And really not doing much in the way of cosmetic improvements. The walls will be the same colors, the carpet will be the same, the ceiling tiles will be the same, just functionally so that we can get them over here, because I don't know if they're going to be here for 2 or 3 years. Ideally, we will identify a plan for some future building improvement down the road. If it happened in 3 years, I'd be ecstatic. It's probably more like 5 years and might never happen, right? Who knows where life goes and what happens. So my plan was to do the functional improvements initially, and then if we're here for 2 or 3 years and we've got a clear path forward on a new building, we're not going to do anything else, right? We're not going to invest in new flooring or ceilings or what have you. However, if it looks like that dream will not be realized, then maybe 3, 4 years down the road, we budget money for new flooring and ceiling tiles and so forth. And so,
Do you anticipate having them that done and the work done and then move over here this year? In calendar year, next 6-8 months or?
yeah, my goal, again, I'll have it on the June 12th agenda. If the board approves it, I'll get the contractor in here really as soon as they can get to work. They're all pretty busy right now, but it's probably a 2 or 3 week job. My goal would be to have all the work done ideally by the end of July. That might be a little too optimistic, but that's what I'd be shooting for.
I guess my question I'm leading up to, once that happens, once we've got the police department relocated over here, what are our plans for that?
Yeah, so I think one of the other things that will be on your agenda on June 12th is an extension of the Cult Life lease. And so the recommendation is to just extend it at all the same terms, but to do it for 2 years and 9 months, simply so it gets on the same schedule as the Girl Scout lease, just to give us more flexibility. So at this point in time, it's just for the current space that he occupies on the east side of the building. And so I'm trying to line up the lease termination dates so that the board can either decide to extend them both at that time, or if we're going to do something different, just so you've got them lined up and you'll have flexibility and not treat anybody poorly at that time. So there's a couple options. One is that we could certainly try to lease that space where the police department is, maybe to Cult Life, maybe to the Girl Scouts. Both of them in different conversations have expressed some interest in that facility. Probably could get you $2,000 a month or so. So my first approach would be to either one of those groups. Hey, do you want it? $2,000 a month. We'll put it on the same term. September of 2025, I think, would be the termination date. So it's a year and 9 months, if I'm not mistaken. Anyway, I'm getting myself twisted around. Anyway, I would go to both of them and say, do you want to lease it? Put it on the same deadline. And then in that ensuing period, I would think as a town, we would have a better idea of what we're going to do. As I've shared with you all many times before, ultimately, I hope that someone will tear that building down, whether that is a private developer who buys the property and redevelops it, or maybe it's the town. Maybe eventually we tear it down and build a new town hall, police department out there on the highway, and maybe we incorporate some rental units in it. Obviously, that's a big heavy lift, and we got to figure out the money to do that, but really just trying to give us as many options as possible. So long-winded answer to the question. In the short term, I'd want to lease it to someone else. There's no revenue factored in here for that, so that would be a additional revenue you could appropriate for something. In the long term, I honestly hope someone will tear that building down.
Do you think we would be able to sit with someone, whether it be one of them or somebody else as is? Or would we be looking at cost? I know I heard something mentioned about needing a new roof and things like that. Is there costs that we would need to go into, or would we even lease it out?
In my mind, there's nothing significant. When the Girl Scouts leased the space over there, they paid for all the upfit costs. That's why they wanted a 3-year lease agreement. We went in and replaced a couple of light bulbs, maybe some fire extinguishers, little things like that. I would expect it'd be the same thing with that, and they'd have to know what they're getting into. Right. And then between now and September of 2025, I would think as a town, we'd figure out what we're doing.
But just going along those lines, if we if you said the space could cash flow almost 24,000, you're taking 15,000 from the part-time police, but you have a 53,000 deficit. That's 38. Apply that, whatever it cash flows to that deficit. You're only got 14 left that you have to come up with.
Actually, you're just about there. I mean, you
Yeah.
could probably pull 25,000 out of the police department in the part-time salaries and benefits, plus 24,000 in rental income.
Right.
If it was a whole year, you're almost there. 49 out of 53. So.
Well, there'd have to be some type of benefit to the police department here anyway, you know, by renting that out or something to
Right.
justify moving them over here, honestly, in my opinion. That $30,000 is coming out of what we initially funded for that roof repair, right?
Correct.
Which was 50-some thousand that we were told last year that had to be done.
And I apologize. I'm honestly not sure. I can't find any documentation of exactly what dollar amount was for.
Was involved in looking at that roof over there, or making some temporary repairs or something.
It was just an aged roof. And I mean, we went over there and we did some minor patching and stuff. I mean, in the past I have had some minor leaks in there, but it was nothing really.
Well, we allocated all that money to get the roof replaced, but it's not to be used, but redirected to $30,000 to get the police department in here.
Give or take, depending on what the bids come back.
No, I agree. I mean, if it needs, you can't count on the income if it's got a leaky roof.
Sure.
So,
I mean, it's been tolerable for the police department, obviously, for the last several years. It's still tolerable now. I'm obviously making the assumption it will be tolerable for whoever rents it in the future.
Well, they need to make every effort to rent it out, recoup some of our expense.
I agree.
Sure. Absolutely.
Especially when we start talking about pulling SROs and things like that.
Yeah, I just didn't want to factor the revenue into the budget because I was trying to be conservative. I put the expense in, but not the revenue. So we can absolutely appropriate that money for whatever you'd like if we decide to do that. So.
Well, you know, a lot of times in the past, we have allocated funds to something that just had to be, and then the funds never got used. They go back into general fund. Sure. A prime example is the park over there at Hill Lane. We just put that money in there and never got used. I don't know how many times that's been done.
Yeah.
So I've made several notes during the course of the discussion tonight. Concern about the sales tax estimate perhaps being a little too aggressive. Concern about raising the minimum salaries in police and public works. Concern about the uniform allowances within both police and public works. And just so you know, those are the same historical numbers that have been allocated in the past. And so that was simply the approach in that particular, in those line items. Talked about switching the SRO, moving the SRO back into the department out on the streets, that $53,000 expense that we talked about, talking to the sheriff and county commissioner, et cetera. Consider the street sweeping if we need to identify savings. And at least I really didn't get a consensus from the board on the motor vehicle tax and street resurfacing in the future, but that's something we can talk about in the future. So. All right.
Yeah, I'd like to talk about it in the future, but I'd like to gauge some public interest on that too, before we vote on it.
Sure. I would
expect a chance to do a little run around, talk to some people, see what they think about that.
Yeah, I mean, just to be clear, I mean, I'm not sold just yet on the whole SRO movement thing. I think this is more of a discussion of the numbers, right?
It's not like this project.
Yeah, so I'm just still trying to figure out what the numbers show and how that helps us as a town. So.
Well, I think if it's something that you all would like to pursue, my goal would be to put it in place for the school year, August 15th-ish, August 25th, when the school year starts. So I feel like there's a reasonable chance of making that happen if that's the board's wish going forward.
I look at it as getting out from under the liability that we're in for that position. God forbid something crazy happen over there, and the town involved in lawsuit. And, you know, I still say it's a county school, it's county responsibility. We have city schools all over the state that, you know, if that was a city school, then we'd be forced to do that. But,
Yeah,
that and to bring in, you know, police officers back for 3 months or whatever.
yeah. So I mean, it definitely would help to have an 8th officer in the department, which actually it's really would be the 7th officer, but it's the net effect of adding an 8th officer that I've talked about with Lieutenant Eschbach in the past. But I think really the only impediments to making it happen are A, whether or not this board wants to make it happen. B, what the county commissioner's reaction will be to just the precedent that it will set. It'll be a new precedent. They haven't done it this way before, but it's a reasonable ask. And then the other impediment is that they're going to have to come up with probably another $20,000 or so to cover the cost of that officer during the summer. When I talked with the sheriff about that, he didn't seem to be overly concerned about identifying those funds. But those would be the two things that I think county commissioners would at least question.
Were you okay on those uniforms for
And
PD?
I think we're good. I mean, maybe we need to move something. I mean, it all depends, that money we talked about, the uniforms or the part-timers, all depend on what happens at the school, bottom line. So we just wait and see what happens there before we make any further decisions.
Does the county give you any foresight on the sales tax distribution? They
In terms of changing the formula or?
no. If it's going to increase or decrease.
Yeah, so
Forecast.
yeah, so typically those projections will come from the League of Municipalities because most of the sales tax revenue that we receive first of all, a lot of it is based on statewide sales tax collections, and then that's divided up among all 100 counties. And then there's a portion of it that's generated within Carteret County. And then that portion is added to our share of the state allocation. And then, yet again, they divide it based on that formula between the towns and the county that you're familiar with, population or the ad valorem tax levy. So the county doesn't really give us the guidance on that. It would be the state, the North Carolina League of Municipalities, the Department of Revenue. Like I said, I factored in a 2% growth rate going forward. I felt like that was pretty conservative. If you think that's too aggressive, I'm happy to reduce it. We just have to make the corresponding adjustments elsewhere. And it's really not a lot of money, right? So like every 1% growth is $5,000, give or take. Yeah, well, essentially what I'm saying is I think we're going to get the same amount next year that we expect to get this year, plus 2% is what the projection is.
I have one question. This is kind of a stupid question. But so with the new tax valuations coming out, I think that comes out this year or whatever. Does the county tell you about what that is and how to project the increase in ad valorem?
So the last revaluation was effective in 2020, if I'm not mistaken. And so I'm not sure if they've scheduled the next one or not. By law, they have to do it every 8 years. They usually don't do it any more frequent than 4. So I think the earliest you would see it is 2024. More than likely, they're probably on a 6-year schedule. I could check that to be certain. So that's not really a consideration in the current year's budget. In the future, it really depends on 2 things. what the tax base is and what you set the rate as. So by law, let's say that our tax base doubles, right? Which it won't, but let's just say that it does. You will by law be required to establish the tax rate that generates the exact same amount of money. So your tax rate will go down, your base will go up, and you'll generate the same amount of money. And then if you want to have a tax increase on top of that, that's the policy decision this board makes. So,
Right.
but yes, they give us a heads up on the numbers. They just gave us updated numbers last week. Basically, our tax base about 464 million, give or take. But I personally, it is your call, but I would not recommend that you plan to keep the tax rate the same once we have a tax revaluation and see that increase in value. Some communities will do that, but it's a tax increase and you have to explain that.
Oh, yeah, and I'm not saying either way. I'm just saying that when new valuations do come out, do you have that foresight to be able to say this is what we project so that you can make that decision?
Yeah, absolutely.
It sounds like you can.
Yeah, we'll have all that data. So the county will come out with some preliminary numbers and we'll share
I thought
that with you.
numbers were coming out in 24.
And that may be, I'm honestly not sure what the next cycle is. I know it's not for this year's budget. It may come out in 2024.
That's fine. I was just, like I said, thought it was a stupid question. So I saved it to the end.
But if for those of you who've been here a long time, so by law, they have to do it every 8 years. At one point in time, they switched to a 4-year cycle, and then there was tough economic times, so they delayed it, and it was 6 years, and then they delayed it again. So if they've said 2024, that may very well be, and that will affect the 24-25 budget. But depending on what the economic conditions are at the time, what the political goals are at the time, just know that if they wanted to, they could delay it up to 2028. And that's a policy decision that their board will make at that time.
Thank you.
Frank, just to be sure you did that, list over there, thinking about the next year or so about the police vehicles, correct? On the work, okay.
In terms of a replacement plan,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, my intent is to give you a plan that basically lays out all the vehicles, how much time we expect, how many years of life we expect to get out of each one of them, when we would expect to replace it, and then we'll adjust it when it comes time. Like if it's in really good shape, we'll push it out. If it's doing worse, we'll bump it up, those kind of things.
I've actually experienced that with them, how they did it and worked very well. Very well put together plan, maybe a 5-year plan. All departments.
It's been attempted here so many times, but for some reason it gets off track. Different plans, right, Don? I mean, how many times have we talked about 5-year plan, 5-year plan? You stick to it. So.
I mean, sometimes you have to make adjustments because if you have a vehicle involved in an accident, that does keep in that plan somewhat. Just got to kind of be adjusted a little bit, but basically, all in all, it worked. Y'all did a 5-year plan, didn't you?
Yeah.
I
5, 10, and 20.
I think the trick of it is identifying the funding sources so that you can kind of level the expenditures out from year to year, and then it makes it a lot easier to adhere to the plan. It's difficult to set it up the first time, right? Particularly if you've been spending one-time money here and there and so forth. But once you get it set up and you discipline yourself, it does work really well. But it's hard the first time.
I want future boards to walk into what I had to walk into 6 years ago. And where they had drained our account by all those police cars at one time. And I gotta come clean here. Don was there. Don and I are two commissioners that are responsible for that 1.25 cent tax increase. We had no choice, and that was part of it. So I don't want that to ever happen again going forward, because I personally don't think that this town should ever have to increase taxes with the growth that we are experiencing now, the revenue growth that we experience, just my opinion.
I believe I hope I can speak for the commissioners here and the mayor. We do have a town manager who's very well versed and qualified and experienced, keeping us where we need to be as far as the size of the town that we're in.
Yeah, he's done an amazing job. He's asking for a 1/4 cent tax decrease, and the salaries have increased 190-something thousand, salaries and benefits. It's a pretty big feat in itself, isn't it?
It is.
Well, again, it's overly conservative estimate last year and strong growth during the current year and pretty conservative growth projected in the future. So
Well, you and I are going to disagree on that term, overly conservative.
I don't even mean it, I don't mean it like negative. I'm just saying, like, I mean, obviously, if you brought in 461,000 for one year and you only budgeted 409 the next year, you're being conservative. And there may be very good reasons for that. I mean, it's very, very conservative. It makes it a lot easier. It made my job a lot easier to put this recommended budget together for you.
Well,
So I don't mean that in a
it's
bad
live and
way.
learn. You come as close to not being able to make payroll when Florence hit, for instance. You learn those kind of lessons to be a little bit overly conservative.
But you're absolutely right. So these revenues estimates are tighter than they were in the current year budget. And so that makes it imperative, particularly for me and for Sandy, but also you, to track these things, make sure that we're staying on target. And it's imperative that if, things are running off the rails, I got to come to you and say, hey, you know what? We probably ought to delay that bulkhead at Anita Fort Park or whatever we would do it. Those are the kind of things. But I feel like the revenue estimates are reasonable. I feel like they're conservative. I'm happy to adjust them if you're nervous by them, but I feel good about them.
Do you intend to, when you build that 5-year plan, I realize that's for car replacement stuff, do you intend to build in some percentage of operating expenses, like, so that we can have that in the bank, basically?
So the way I've always operated in my career is I start with the current year budget. I identify all the capital replacement needs, whether it's a new police car 5 years from now or a new backhoe 6 years from now or whatever. Then I factor in whatever your capital goals are going forward. If you say to me, look, we want to do 2 bulkheads a year instead of 1, I'll factor that in there. And then I'll fold all of that into a 5-year forecast, and it'll give you an idea of what you might be looking at in the future. And I'll make assumptions about revenue growth, and I'll make assumptions about inflation and what it would be. I can tell you, I've never seen inflation anywhere near where it is now. None of us have, maybe unless you lived in the early 80s maybe.
Yeah,
But
I was
so I was a kid then. So
18%.
I'll be projecting all of that out and showing that to you to help you make a good decision for the future.
What I'm basically getting at is that the town should, in my humble opinion, while we're saving for these future expenditures, we should also be putting a little bit away so that for a rainy day, basically.
So that's really what your fund balance is. And I applaud the 6 of you. I applaud your predecessors. I applaud my predecessor. You have a good, healthy fund balance. So that is your rainy day fund, essentially.
Well, we have a plan to continue to grow the rainy day fund. I mean, we don't need to be sitting on millions of dollars, but it would be nice in the event of other catastrophic events if we had some cushion. Because it wouldn't take but a bad event for us to not be sitting as pretty as we are.
I think the state just requires a balanced budget. They don't, you can't tax someone for a savings account or something, right? You can identify programs and fund those programs, but you can't say, well, in our budget, we're going to put 50,000 in a savings account. We can certainly say we could put 50,000 in a hurricane fund or something like that.
You certainly can. I mean, so maybe the simplest way to answer your question is you're already doing it because you have seen that fund balance increase over time, just kind of organically, because your expenditures came in less than budgeted, because your revenues exceeded your estimate. So the town has done a good job in that regard in terms of building the fund balance. The state, typically they'll recommend that you have 2 months worth of cash on hand to meet your cash flow needs. If you're down that bad, you're in trouble, right? So like,
that's just what I'm getting at.
You have a policy that says 28%, I believe, is what you're.
28%.
So you're at about 100%, 113% right now. So you all should be proud of that and applaud yourselves for that. And I would submit to you that your job going forward is to make sure that number doesn't fluctuate too much, doesn't go down too much. what I would suggest to you is that if you see an opportunity to buy a piece of land that's really going to be helpful to the town in the long term, you may want to think about spending a little bit of the fund balance for something like that in a very measured, thoughtful way for a one-time expense. But I would not spend it on street maintenance or salaries or anything like that.
And just to point one thing out to Commissioner Watson more than that, just a reminder that that hurricane money requires a supermajority vote. Lesson learned, police cars and Florence taught the boards for the last 6 years a valuable lesson. And that's why that's there.
Yeah, and
We're in that position that you just
Yeah,
discussed.
we've been there and done that. So we made adjustments over the last several years to hopefully never go there again, but
Describe that a little bit more. What are you talking about?
so what I would submit to you is that in my eyes, as your town manager, the whole fund balance is your hurricane savings fund, right? I don't even, please don't be offended when I say this, but the distinctions that we make on Sandy's monthly report really don't mean anything to me because I want those numbers to be a lot higher than the numbers that she's showing. So in my mind, that fund balance number, that's the key number for you all as the stewards of this town to be paying attention to and making sure it doesn't get down too low. Like I said, you're around 100% right now. That's really good, right? If that starts getting down to 75%, I wouldn't be too worried about it, but I'd be paying attention. If it gets down to 50, I'd start getting a little
Is
more
there a
worried.
statutory maximum?
I don't believe there's a statutory maximum. There's probably a political maximum.
I'm sure there
At a
is.
certain point, your constituents will be saying to you, hey,
No, I
if you're
get
going to take our money, you might as well do something good with it or give it
Right.
back.
I get that.
There's a couple, like PAL bills restricted for streets and so forth, so that's segregated out. But in reality, I'm looking at that whole $2.4 million number. That's the number I'm looking at. That's the number I'd encourage you to look at. If you want to, in your mind, segregate it in whatever way you want, that's fine. But for purposes of managing the town, I'm looking to keep that number about where it is, maybe dip a little bit for a one-time opportunity or an emergency. What it's there for. Ideally, it's going to grow every year just because you're going to come in a little under budget on some things.
I personally would like a supermajority vote to be required on any of those type funds. It's just too tempting, just like that board did years ago, just rape the whole fund and just drain it for frivolous, simply because they didn't have the foresight to plan for what we're talking about, for police cars. It took years to overcome that. In Florence, it was bad.
Yeah, I mean, we've got a total of, I think, 9 police vehicles, 2 of which are spares, if I'm not mistaken. Hopefully we can get 6, 7 years out of each one of those vehicles. And so hopefully we're replacing 1 or 2 vehicles every year going forward. So ballpark, I mean, we'll look at it going forward. So that's roughly a new police car fully outfitted right now is probably pushing $45,000, $50,000. And so theoretically, that $55,000 or so at lease payments you have there, theoretically, that'll kind of get you where you need to go on the police vehicle. You're probably going to supplement a little bit. Quite frankly, I'm a little more worried about Public Works and coming up with a good plan for them because their stuff's in good shape too, but we don't have any sort of capacity identified in the budget for that going forward. That's going to be the trick, I think.
So talking about those police vehicles, Frank, what's your opinion on the mileage they can, what your experience at Emerald Isle? 140?
I think we would routinely get more than 100,000 miles, probably 120,000-ish, give or take.
We didn't really want to go that much because the maintenance would increase
That's more than the 80,000 we've been told here.
So between 80 and 100,000 is, you need to, you pass the 100,000 mark.
Needs
Get
to be a
ready to
spare
get-
car.
Yes, sir.
Well, we learned that too. That's another valuable lesson. There were no maintenance records on those police cars, period.
How many miles does each one of our cars use a year?
Probably in the 15,000, 20,000 range. I've got, actually in the booklet, there's a list of all the vehicles with the mileage that's on them currently. They're all like brand new, just about. So if you look behind tab number,
And the highest was 34,000.
tab number 6, page 78. So for example, the highest mileage vehicle is 53,000 miles. That's an unmarked car that Bill McKinney drove. As you know, my plan is for the new chief to have the Tahoe that was formerly used by Zach. You can see the other mileage there. Those 2021 Dodge Chargers, those are, when did we take delivery of those?
We got one of them before the others.
It's been about 2 years, I think, since those came in.
Yeah,
Almost.
I think mine was the first one. It was just over 2 years, I believe. It was
Well,
April.
Frank, you've got 9 police cars, 7 police officers. Why wouldn't we bring one of those cars back over here and eliminate some of this mileage pay we're having to pay?
Yeah, so that's what I'm looking at. I'm looking at doing that for the planner. I just put that in there as a placeholder.
Well,
for
that's
the
why
miles
we
things.
got Zach to apply for a grant for that Tahoe, was to use in-house here. Transferred it over there. Because you said at that time you want to drive your Jeep.
Yeah.
And we agreed to do that, but now that you're getting a town planner,
So I think on the planner, we could either take one of the reserve police vehicles, one of the Chargers. It would probably wind up being the older one, the unmarked one, 53,000 miles. I certainly can assign that to her. I probably would then just tell her that, look, if the police department's got a couple vehicles that are in the shop, you're going to have to drive around in your own car to do your work. But that should be very infrequent, I think. I mean,
would that affect your budget on that line?
we could save the $3,600 that I plugged in there, and that could go toward police officer or whatever else, whatever adjustments we make. So, yeah, and honestly, I've been trying to decide whether or not to do that or not. I just wanted to be fully prepared.
Well, I mean, that sounds good to me.
Fair enough. I guess a couple things. Is there consensus from the board that you want to put forth the request for the sheriff to provide the school resource officer starting next school year, and therefore transfer the $53,000 of revenue to them and then make that up other ways in the budget that we've talked about? Sounds like Commissioner Bond's interested in that. I'm not sure how the others are feeling about that or not. And I suppose for that matter, from a budget standpoint, you don't necessarily have to decide that as part of the budget, but I think you would probably want to make that change at the beginning of a school year, whenever that happens.
I'd like to give it some more thought, and then get just more thought, and go from there. That's me.
Yeah, me too. I definitely support it from a financial standpoint. I just want to think about it a little bit more, but I don't need a whole lot of time. I mean, if we want to put this on the agenda for, one of our, like the June meeting or something like that, I don't know, when do you think's our kind of make or break point?
Yeah, you don't need to decide it tonight, and
Okay.
you can decide it on June 12th if you like. I would submit that you don't even have to decide then if you don't want to. It's just going to make it that much harder to get the approvals for the beginning of this school year on August 25th.
Well, I do want to be considerate of whatever the county needs to do from their standpoint to make it happen. So I want to give them enough time. However, I just don't want to just jump into it. I mean, from a financial standpoint, like I said, and like Steve had brought up, it does make sense. I just want to sort of think about it a little bit more.
County's got people standing in line for those kind of jobs. That's the easiest job in the state of North Carolina. Everybody wants it. He's shaking his head about it. Everybody wants that job.
Well, and if push comes to shove, we still have a resource officer who we can be in there until they get one in there. I mean, it's not like,
Yeah, absolutely.
not the end of the day here. I mean, it's, I just want to have a little more thought with it for right now. That's just me. I'm not against either one of them. Just want to give some more thought. I don't know how y'all feel about it.
I need to give it some thought too. I mean, it's pros and cons to it.
I think if the board's uncertain as to what they want to do on that issue. Honestly, we can structure that in a way that it doesn't affect the budget because, for example, if you, let's just say that you don't know what you want to do right now, we can leave the budget exactly as it is and it'll be balanced and it'll be fine. If you all decide on June 12th or even in July or for that matter in November of next year, we can make those adjustments that we talked about with the part-time salaries and benefits and also leasing out the building next door and cover the cost to make that change. So don't feel like you're pressured to make that change. To me, it seemed like you'd want to have the same officer there all school year long. To me, that would be more important.
You do have to give the county time to go with that, to get officer for the new school year starts.
Yeah. Yeah. I just want to make sure we're getting, the same product, the same level, the quality of product that we're getting by having our own community officer there. I mean, there are a lot of people at that school that really like, especially in today's climate right now, love having a Cape Carteret police officer there. Me being one of them. I have 2 kids at that school.
And then you got a wife that's a teacher there.
I have a wife that's a teacher there too. So, but I'm not going to let that cloud making decisions for the town. I just think that that thought is
Why not? That's how we got where we're at, because we had a mayor that had a wife that's all over there.
Well,
Well-
not at the time this SRO was hired. He was commissioner.
well.
I came here in 08.
I want to think about the
Ron Perry
town.
was the first SRO they hired back in 2006 or 7, and either, I don't know, if Harvey Ellis was still mayor or it was Harkless then. When I came here as chief, Fowler was the commissioner. We had, I want to say that Mitch Schlinder was in the school when I first got here. Barry had come out, and I think Mitch was in. They had an SRO for a couple of years then. But, and you get back when we're talking about the traffic, even if the sheriff's department goes over there, we gotta be prepared to do that traffic every day. Because we now, we no longer control what they're doing in that school, and that SRO is gonna be an hour late, and we don't know it. All of a sudden, we get a major traffic congestion out here on Highway 24. That's something we have to be prepared for, whether we got an SRO in that school or not.
Well, you got the same problem there that you had at Broad Creek. And that was before they just opened it, I think, this week, that new, I mean, traffic would be in the turning lane for 3/4 of a mile, maybe half a mile.
I don't know why people would care where the law enforcement comes from. They're all trained and qualified.
Well, a lot of it has to do with the relationship between the parents, the teachers, the school, knowing that the officer that the school that the town is in, that they're serving those people. Even though there's people from the county going in, that's understood. Everybody wears the same badge, law enforcement. But sometimes by relationship, I mean, you knew I was over there for 9 years at the school. You know what? And I went in there as a dare officer for 9 years, and there was not a school resource officer. They had Officer Friendly. That was Dolly Ramirez. And, but they seeked Emerald out to come in and be the dare officer and not Cape Carteret. They wanted, why, I don't know. I wasn't involved with that conversation. But not long after that, when I came out as a dare officer, Yule Atkinson went in, who became chief. You were chief here at one time?
Who?
Yule Atkinson?
Yeah,
Yeah, he was chief for just a little
Maybe
while.
interim or.
Yeah, but he became as a dare officer over there after I left. And that was in 2008, I believe, 8 or 9.
Remember as far back as Mitch being over there.
I mean, isn't the upshot though that we don't have to have a specialty trained officer? We don't have to pay for an SRO or somebody to have the SRO, go get the SRO certification. If we need to replace an officer, we don't have to find one that has an SRO certification. Isn't that the real?
That's a good question.
Isn't that the real upside of giving that to the county? Then the county is on the hook to make sure they have RSO folks, and I know they have a bunch of RSO folks.
If he quit tomorrow, do you have another SRO? That's what I'm saying.
So you have to, for the SRO, that officer has to have general serve, so that's 1 year experience, and then they have to within, I can't remember, I think it's 6 months of that appointment of SRO, they have to go through the SRO training. So if we lost Stefano for some reason, we could grab Hayden or me or whoever, as long as they complete that SRO training within 6 months of that appointment.
How long is that class?
It's a week or two.
2 weeks?
I think it's 2,
I
yeah.
think it's 2 weeks.
And we've lost, 3, I think, and then I can think of.
I don't disagree that from a financial standpoint, it makes good sense. I mean, but I just want to make sure we're getting the same quality of product.
Well, maybe you need to reach out to some of the other schools that's got the county in there.
That's what I want to do.
Well, they do have, I mean, I know some of the school resource officers, you do as well.
Yeah.
And they're great people. I mean, Fred Meadows been at Groveton for how many years? 20 years and 20 years?
But we get
Well,
to
that's good,
discussing,
but-
too much of that, Cameron, I would probably request a closed session to talk about some issues.
That's fine.
Okay.
That's fine. And I know exactly where you're going, so
Yeah.
I would agree with that. Let's just table it for right now, because
Okay.
this could go on all night, but I just want to give that a little bit more thought. But agree, from a financial standpoint, it makes sense. And like I was going to say, I have to think about this from Cape Carteret at large, not just my personal situation. And I have no problem doing that. So.
I started back in 2017, and at that time, I think I was the mayor, and there was just a rumor, I don't know who started it, but there was a rumor that we were pulling our SRO officer out. You were here, correct? Weren't you here?
I was walking by Dave Fowler's office and the principal, the whole thing was full, and he said, "Hey, Commissioner Martin, come in here." And I didn't know what I was walking
It's
into.
very correct.
And it was a hornet's nest. It
I mean, it
was.
was just a rumor, there was nothing to it, and she was in here within an hour. There were calls, we got called, you were here. We got calls, I mean, all day long for almost a week, of people calling. I mean, just be prepared, because if they think that, they'll be,
Yeah.
it's just.
There's a difference between pulling them and changing who they are.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And
There's
we
a
wanna
different
make
set of
sure they-
We were never
circumstances.
fooling that.
Yeah.
I said, I want to make sure that they're aware. We need to make sure that nobody
Right.
thinks we're taking somebody out, because
No.
we weren't even thinking about replacing it. It just went out there. It was.
That's why I wanted to make sure, what I said a while ago, if say the county did come in and do the SRO and didn't get in there till November, we would still supply a SRO until that would happen.
Exactly.
I mean, it's not no pulling nobody out.
Nobody's advocating
I don't
that.
know part of
Yeah.
that.
No, me either. It's just,
No.
in my opinion, it's a county school, it's a county responsibility. They've shirked it all
Yep.
over the county.
And they're very trained.
And yeah.
Are there other changes you'd like me to make for the next iteration that comes back to you?
I'm just still uncomfortable with the sales tax forecast. I want to do some research myself on that. I'll get back with you.
Any other adjustments? And obviously, this would not be the final version. I'm just trying to identify whatever changes you'd like to make at this point.
On that quarter cent, what amount of money does that generally generate?
It's around $11,000. And so that's an option too. I mean, you certainly could leave the rate the same, decrease the sales tax estimate by $11,000. If you want to be a little more conservative on that, that's an option.
I would hate, I feel responsible for that quarter cent, and I would have loved to gotten it off in the last 6 years. But I would hate to take it off this year, and then next year, you come to us and say, look, I recommend going up on the MOTV, or whatever. I take it away, or give it back, and then take it away next year in another form. I don't know, and then we're looking at giving, maybe possible raises to certain people, raising them, so I don't know. I got to do some thinking about that myself.
I will say I do tend to agree. I mean, the up and down, you know, I don't think we necessarily want to do that. And I think there's a lot of open-ended questions, 5-year plan. We don't have that yet. We don't have what the, salary situation is going to look like. I would personally be cautious of taking something away now to then add it the next year if we don't have all that figured out. So I do tend to agree with Commissioner Martin on that.
I'd like to walk around and brag about it.
Yeah, I mean,
You know,
yeah.
especially tomorrow night, I'd like to go in there and say, yeah, we, you know, we're on the county court, county's going more taxes. It's unheard of, but there again, you're gonna catch a lot more controversy if you lower. If it was a penny we're talking about, it's different. It's a quarter of a cent.
Right.
It's,
Yeah, and so in all honesty, that recommendation came from two things. One is I'm anal retentive. I don't like a 0.25 cent tax rate. I'd rather it be 21 or 22 or 20 or whatever. So full disclosure, I don't like partial cent tax increases. The other part of it is I was very much trying to set the tone for our organization that we, and for me personally, that we're going to be frugal and that we're going to be very thoughtful and careful about tax increases. And so it was very deliberate in that sense. Is it a big amount of money? No. It's $11,000. It's really small percentage. The average person saves $5 or $6, so it was really more the principle of the thing. And so if you all would like to keep it at 21.25, absolutely no
I don't have a
argument
problem
from
with
me
dropping
either.
it.
So.
we, talk about being frugal. That's why we went up instead of 2 cents. We went up a penny and a quarter. We're being conservative.
Sure.
We could have easily went up 2 cents back then in 2017, 2018, whenever it was.
I will tell you that I will try. I've always tried. I will try very hard to avoid any tax rate increase at any point in my time. That's always the goal.
$11,000 is not gonna make us, it's not gonna break us. But if we able to save the taxpayers just a little bit of money that 1 year, and if we have to go up 2 years down the road, at least we save the money now. We'll worry about later. Just a thought.
And again, please take the increase in the motor vehicle tax in the spirit in which it was intended. It's a logical potential revenue source for street maintenance if you want to do more in the future. Doesn't mean you have to do it. There's other ways to do it. I try very hard to link the revenue sources with a particular service so that people know that's what it's getting, right? So
I don't think a tax is a tax is a tax. You can call it a different name, but it's still a tax. I'm gonna have to do some thinking about that quarter cent.
fair enough.
So we have the next meeting on Monday.
So the public hearing is next Monday night. And so I purposely schedule it that way because I want to hear the public's thoughts so that hopefully we can come to you on June 12th with something that reflects whatever public input we've received. Now, you certainly can listen to more between May 22nd and June 12th and change it any way you want. But I'm trying to set it up in a logical process that, you know, maybe somebody's going to say something to you during that public hearing. You're going to say, yeah, absolutely, we need to change that, and we'll get it right for June 12th for you. So I would expect that meeting to be relatively short. It can be as short or as long as you want it to be.
Okay. So my only thing is will we see another version of this subsequent to tonight's comments, or does that happen on the June?
Yeah, so I think based on the conversations here tonight, I will tell you that just on my own initiative, I'm going to take another look at the sales tax estimate. I'm going to take a look at the vehicle allowance for the planner. I'm going to take another look at the uniform numbers. These are all pretty small things. I may make a few tweaks on those things, but it will essentially look pretty much the same as what you see right now. There could be a couple of minor tweaks.
Okay.
We're a lot closer than we've ever been at this stage in the game since I've been on this board. Just a few tweaks here and there. A lot better than it has been.
I mean, to be perfectly direct and honest with you, I'm sensing some concern from you all. Am I perceiving that correctly?
Oh, yeah, I got plenty of concerns, but I'm not ready to discuss them right now.
Well, and I'm not talking about a specific expenditure or anything like that, just a general sense of concern going forward.
Not for me. I'm happy with this product. In fact, I was just getting ready to say, I think this is a great product. We've talked about we're closer to the end goal earlier, I think, in the year than we were last year. But I think this is a good product. I think we're just making minor tweaks on some of the fringes. And I mean, I think that's easy stuff. I mean, this is kind of happy to glad stuff, really, but for the SRO part, I feel really good about this product.
Well, I'm just sort of sensing like, maybe fear for the future. Is that maybe?
If I may speak, and I see what you're talking about, Steve, because I feel that you're more gun shy of what's happened in the past and what y'all experienced. And I can see where you have some reservations of moving forward in certain areas. And I would respect that. But I think with the experience we all have in this room, 3 of us in municipalities, I feel we're good. We're doing good with this. My personal opinion about this. I don't see anything. I mean, I've dealt with these budgets quite a few times, and this is a very good product, as Cameron said. But I can understand your reservation because of what you experienced in the past with other boards.
Well, we
And I
didn't get to
understand
where we're at today without being conservative.
And I feel like this is conservative.
Well,
I mean, it's just more like it's opened up more to where we're able to do more. And you're like, I feel that. That's what I feel, and I can understand that, and I would respect that for what you experienced before. But moving forward with this, I think we're good.
well, Frank will tell you that he and I have had this discussion. I'm trying to figure him out. He's trying to figure me out. That's the bottom line, right?
Yeah.
We talked about that. And I told him the other day, I said, this is your first budget. And, so I'm gonna give you the first one. I mean, I'm just like, it's trying to get comfortable. It's
Because what you experienced before, that's what I'm trying to say. But it's as good.
And
I
honestly,
feel it's good.
and honestly, when I made that comment, it had nothing to do with Frank Rush as an individual or any of you as individuals or how you feel about me or other people. It was really more just, I don't know, I'm sensing from you all just be a fear going forward. But
Good.
all right, that's fair enough.
Well, Jeff, it's a lot easier for you, Cameron, Don here, you and the mayor. Y'all have all worked for the government for your whole careers. I haven't.
That's why I respected that.
Charlie hasn't.
Yeah.
So we ran businesses. It's a total different mindset when you're sitting here.
Sure.
Guys, I'll be honest with you. And it's
And that's why I said, I feel we could all say this with what you had experienced in the past. You give you great reservations, like, like conservative, Railway has always been conservative because you had to get over that hump.
Well, Don was there too.
And I get that.
Don has been, he's a government employee his entire career until recently probably, but he's used to it. You know what I'm saying? He's used to it,
I mean, with success, being successful as a town, it becomes good management, leadership, communication, and teamwork. And if we all put that together in one with us as a whole, we're gonna be just fine.
Well, you get tired of funding things, and they don't come into fruition. The money goes back to the general fund. That's another thing I don't like. That's happened every year since I've been on this board. We fund this, we fund that, we fund the roof, we fund the park. It never use the money, it goes right back in the general fund. So, I don't ever, I mean, my goal is to have a budget, when we fund something, to use that money. Not to let it just roll back over in the general fund. Or not be tempted to use it for something else.
And so, like I said at the beginning, to me, this document is as much a work plan as it is a financial plan. And so if you look at each of those pages in there, you see those goals identified for next year. Some of them are kind of generic and vague and feel good stuff. Some of them are very specific. So I'm going to take whatever the final product is that you all approve on, hopefully on June 12th. That's going to be the work plan for next year. And if you say we're going to put 15,000 toward a bulkhead, I'm going to get the bulkhead there for you. If you say we're going to put $30,000 into park improvements, I'm gonna get the park improvements.
Well, that hasn't happened in the past, so.
Okay.
And I'm not, it's just a learning curve, right?
Understood.
I can tell you, as the finance officer, what he's done with this family, I have, obviously, I don't get the raise, it doesn't matter. He has taught me so much. And working a budget, I had never done a budget before I came here. I didn't do government. The hours that he has spent and the details he has spent and the stuff that I've had to pull for him and watch him figure stuff out has amazed me. And I will tell you, I was here 6 years prior to that with budgets, but I never did that for the person who was doing that budget.
Well, I know,
So
I
I
know
can
our
tell you
former town
The
manager
detail is tremendous.
was very, very conservative on revenue, and now we get Frank that is not as conservative. It's just different. So, but anyway, like I said, I'm just gonna do a little studying on the sales tax myself. Other than that, the improvements with the police department and whatnot, getting their salaries and the public works salaries up to where I feel like they need to be. That'll be my main objective.
And as I understood your conversation earlier, that's something that we would study over the course of the first few months of the next fiscal year and then consider in the future, right?
We want a hole in those studies, man. I mean, it's one study right after another. But if that's the way you want to do it, then that's fine.
Well, I thought that's what you all told me you wanted to do.
Well, as far as going around here getting more comps from towns and stuff, is that what you're advocating for that, or?
No, I didn't say anything. I said about the public works. We don't have any career advancement way to how to give them incentives.
One did not come to mind, CDL.
Yeah, I mean,
That's exactly what I was thinking.
Commissioner Waters, I thought about that many times, as far as you have CDL, you pesticide license, safety certification,
There you go.
traffic certification.
There you go.
And that's what I did for my guys.
I mean, the wheels are turning on it. It's just,
Yeah. I believe if we get something rolling for you guys, same as the police department, we're on the move.
Well, we got it. We have said, if you guys remember, last year, year before last, we got it for our clerk, if she got her certification. That advancement. So.
But we need to have a plan in place.
There's something to work
Yeah.
towards.
Right.
Yeah.
Just something plan where you get so many months to get this, or so many years to get this, you get this amount, whatever.
And so, and from what I heard from you all in the discussion was to go through that thought process, put it in writing, make it the plan over the course of the next few months or so, let you all vote on it and be comfortable with it, but not really putting the money in the budget right now. Did I hear that correctly?
No, but that's what I understood.
No performance raises or whatever like we've given in the past that seem to go sometimes not to the right spot, in my opinion, but that's just me.
Well, when I talk about performance, that's what I'm talking about, is that there's a specific goal with that performance.
Yeah.
For like the CDL, which is, here again, now you have to go through a school. Well, it ain't as easy to get the CDL like you used to. So now the state's dictated they have to go to the school, and there's a cost involved with that as well, but that gives you something to look forward to. And once they get that and whatever certifications, now you have, met an expectation, and we're going to reward them. That's what I'm talking about.
And we can absolutely come up with that plan. I guess what I gathered
Right.
from you all is that we were going to take our time and do that over the
Yeah.
first 3-4 months. Or so.
Yeah.
That's all I was just trying to confirm.
Okay.
Okay. Fair enough. I don't have anything further unless you all do.
Do you need a motion to adjourn?
Well, I would just like to say that here again, Frank's job is to come up with plans and options. And this is exactly what we got here. And it's up to you guys, decide, do you like this plan, and what changes need to be made? You heard the suggestions, and now you go back and, tweak those things and bring it back to us. So thank you, Frank. I know sometimes it's like I'm in a conversation, it's like my face may go blank. Doesn't mean I'm irritated or anything. It's just I'm thinking. Because when it comes to money, I'm a very serious guy as well. So please don't take, if you see me or whatever, and I'm not smiling or whatever, I'm generally a very jovial guy, but, business is business type of thing. So you're doing an amazing job in my view, sir.
And again, I did not mean that comment in
I know.
a personal way whatsoever.
No, I didn't take it that
Purely
way.
organizational. I mean, but ultimately, like, at the end of the day, this is you guys
That's
putting
right.
money where your mouth is, right? It needs to be something that you believe in and that it has money for the things that are important to you.
There's one thing I've learned sitting on this board is there's no such thing as a perfect budget. None whatsoever. You do the best you can, balance the budget the state requires you to do, and then go from there.
Any more comments? We'll do it again next Monday if I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Yeah, next Monday. Second.
I'll second.
All right, all in favor? Thank you, guys. Thank you, staff, for being here. Sounds valuable too, and I appreciate you being here. And thank you guys for coming.